Sweet home, Santa Barbara, where the skies are so blue. Sweet home, Santa Barbara, what's worked for me can work for you.
Welcome back, friends, to Sweet Home Santa Barbara. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Robinson. I'm with my friend, realtor, and co-host,
Scott Williams. Jonathan, it's good to be back with you.
Yeah, and today we're going to be going into a subject that I know nothing about, really, which is inspections from a buyer's perspective. We did do one on inspections from a seller's perspective. And the first question that pops into my head, Scott, is why would somebody want to do a inspection from a buyer's perspective?
Well, in a certain number of cases, a buyer of a house is going to be handed an inspection that the seller did. That's actually less than half the time, but it happens with certain regularity. And a buyer should take that in and pay attention to what that inspection says. But most buyers are going to decide to call an inspection company, either the same one the seller used to get a refresher on, what might have changed, or they're going to call their own inspection. And this is really a necessity of home buying. A buyer must do some inspecting.
Why must they do some inspecting if the seller just got a inspection 2 weeks earlier?
Well, I think in buyers' minds, there's a good reason to wonder whether or not the seller might be hiding something that might not even have appeared on that inspection. That's a wise point of view for a buyer to stand in. Are they hiding anything? They probably aren't, but at least you need to answer that question to your own satisfaction. And not everyone is willing to be upfront about disclosure laws. Sellers in California have quite a few questions they have to answer, and you need somebody helping you to determine whether or not the seller is being fair with you.
Yeah, and also, I guess if you're a buyer and you miss something, that could cost you a huge amount of money. What are some of the things that really need to be attended to from a buyer's perspective, making sure that they don't get surprised?
Well, you've brought up a really good question. I'm going to just round about here. That seller may not know that much about the property. It might have been a rental for the last 10 years or more. It's also true that the seller may have died, so it's an estate sale. Mm-hmm. These are other good reasons why the buyer needs to be in charge of burrowing into this property. They may just have an unaware seller. All mm-hmm. of these should push a buyer to say, I got to do this. Mm-hmm. We want to start with a generalized report.
And what's a generalized report is kind of like what the seller might do. And you start with a generalized report and then sometimes take that information and say, oh, we need to go more into depth.
Yeah, that's right. If you're generalist, that main inspector guy says, oh, I'm not so sure about these pipes or those wires or this roof, please get a roofer to look more deeply at it. You always want to follow up whenever that generalist hedges on some system in the house.
Uh-huh. Is there a general price range for these things? Is each report X amount of dollars or each one totally different price?
Well, there is some varying. The less expensive ones are the termite reports. They're often $100, $150. The physical inspection reports are more money. Those are often $500 to $1,000, maybe sometimes a little more if it's a particularly large house. In between, we have the inspections of the sewer lateral. That's usually $250. And then things like mold or radon, those are often in the $500, $600, $700 category.
You can spend a lot of money before you even get the house.
That's true. Another one came to mind is a foundation guy or a geologist. Those are usually $400-ish to talk to them. And if you want the report, probably add another $1,000 to that.
Wow. So what does the general inspector give you a sense of which other reports you need, or do you always want to do them? I know like with a sewer lateral, if you have a problem, that can cost you a lot of money.
Yeah, depending on how long it is, I've seen prices over $35,000 to replace the sewer line. And of course, if it's a septic system, it could be twice that amount of money. So yes, we're talking all of these at the end of each of these reports or inspections is a potentially very large cost.
Yeah. So how do you know which ones of these inspections you should get?
Well, you're going to be relying to a certain degree on your realtor to know that neighborhood. The soils conditions in certain neighborhoods are well known to people who work there all the time. Looking at a roof, I can usually size it up pretty well and say that one's looking like it's at the end of its life. So your realtor is your helper, but just use your common sense. If it's on a sloping lot, hillside area, you probably are going to want to talk to a geologist about what conditions are in that neighborhood, even though, it's going to cost you more than $1,000.
And this is where some of your expertise and experience can really save people money, I would imagine, because you're going to know more than the guy who got his real estate license 3 years ago.
That's for sure. Let's use that as an introduction to an idea that we call highballing. And highballing is something that a buyer can take advantage of. Sellers have to defend against it. You have a sewer lateral looked at by your sewer guy, and he says it's going to be $12,000 to replace the sewer lateral. And there may be another guy in town who for $8,000 will replace that sewer lateral, but the number that the seller gets is $12,000, and it's written down on a piece of paper from a contractor, and it looks like that's the price. Mm-hmm. If you're a buyer and you get $12,000 given to you, then you can still hire the guy for $8,000 and save the $4,000. This is where the knowledge of the realtors of what the costs of things are come in to help your buyer or help your seller as this negotiation goes on.
Yeah, and I know when you sold my house, you did all the work. I was in a different city, and I imagine you kind of know who's good and who's not.
Yeah, I've fixed up more than 300 houses, Jonathan. So I have a pretty good idea of the cost of things and who does them and who you ought to hire. Other realtors could have similar knowledge, but not everyone knows that much.
Right. So what other considerations are there that we haven't talked about in terms of buyer inspections?
Well, you just don't get cowed by the fact that you've got some great reports from the seller. That's probably really excellent, but you're going to need to go ahead and move forward and double check. That's just the buyer's responsibility. That's just important to always keep that in mind. I think that's rule number one if you're a buyer.
Now, when do you do these? Do you do them after you made an offer while things are in escrow? Where does it take place?
Yeah, it's after the offer is accepted. You're usually given a time frame from as short as a week to as long as 17 days, rarely more than 17, except in very complicated situations. So pretty much right away, these people need to be hired and lined up as soon as you're in escrow.
Okay. And any final words of advice? Well,
I hope that things go well, and that, if you need interpretation of, the data that comes at you, you really have to rely on your realtor at that point in time. And they're going to be the lead person on your negotiations you have with that seller.
So make sure your realtor knows what they're doing.
For sure.
Okay. Well, great, Scott. Always good information. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to having you again listen to our episodes on Sweet Home Santa Barbara.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite app. If you know someone preparing to sell their home, please tell them about the podcast. Visit scottwilliams.com to contact me and download the 2 free e-booklets, Is My House Saleable Now? And How Not to Buy a Money Pit. Thank you for listening.